Pedro Lopez, also known as the Monster of the Andes, is a Colombian serial killer, child and fugitive who murdered a minimum of 110 people, mostly young women and girls, from 1969 to 1980. He claims to have murdered at least 350 people, making him one of history's most prolific serial killers. Welcome to How to Deal. You true crime junkies out there, make sure you punch that subscribe button, kick the like icon, and show your rage to everyone by sharing this video with everyone you know. Now let's begin. Pedro Lopez was born on October 8, 1948, in Venadillo, Colombia. He was the seventh of 13 children born to a sex worker named Benilda Lopez. He had a troubling childhood growing up due to a violent household and the absence of a father figure. His real dad was murdered during La Violencia, a Colombian civil war, 6 months before Pedro's birth. In 1957, at the age of 8, he was caught by his mother attempting to molest his younger sister. He was kicked out of the house, ordered to never return again, rendering him homeless. After 4 years scavenging what he can on the streets to survive, an American couple found him on the curb and showed him some compassion. A second chance at a normal childhood, he was given a home to stay at, a place where he could eat home-cooked meals and have a safe room to rest his head. They even enrolled him in public school. In 1963, he was sexually assaulted by a trusted male teacher in his school. After being violated, old emotional wounds flared back up. He stole money stashed in a room in the school and ran away from home, returning to the only thing he knew, the streets of Colombia. For the next 6 years, Pedro got by begging for food or committing petty thefts. One skill he picked up was that of stealing cars. Chop shops would pay him good money for auto parts. In 1969, Pedro was arrested for auto theft and sentenced to 7 years. After serving just 2 days, Pedro was gang-raped by 4 older inmates. For the next 2 weeks, he was scheming and executing his revenge on the 4 men, killing each one at a time. Authorities deemed it as self-defense and only added an additional 2 years to his sentence. Upon his release in 1978, Pedro began wandering the northwestern area of South America, eventually landing in Peru. It was during this time that Pedro murdered roughly about 100 girls from various indigenous tribes throughout the region. While many of the bodies were unverifiable, a known incident was that of him being captured by the Ayacuchoan tribe in south-central Peru after attempting to abduct a 9-year-old girl. They stripped and tortured him for hours before deciding to bury him up to his neck in the sand. Luck happened to be on his side this day when an American missionary intervened and convinced the tribe that murder was ungodly and that they should turn him over to the police. They agreed to hand him over to the authorities. Not wanting to waste time with petty complaints, the Peruvian government just expelled him from the country. After his deportation from Peru, Pedro resumed his killing spree. Although dozens of young women went missing, authorities believed they were due to an increase in human sex trafficking in the area. In April 1980, areas surrounding Ambato, Ecuador, were hit with a flash flood, unearthing the remains of several young girls who had been reported missing. This prompted the police to reopen these investigations. A few days after the flood, a local woman named Carvina was on her way to the markets with her 12-year-old daughter when Pedro attempted to abduct the girl. Local merchants were able to overpower Pedro and hold him until the police arrived. While in custody, Pedro refused to cooperate during his interrogation, choosing to remain silent throughout their line of questioning. Police concocted a plan to send Detective Pastor Cordova into the same cell, posing as another inmate. Eventually, he began to sing, boasting that in total, he had murdered over 100 in Ecuador and around 200 more deaths in the neighboring countries of Peru and Colombia. He described how he first lured the victims away from public spaces with a trinket like a hand mirror before and strangling them with his bare hands. Additionally, on occasions, he would exhume the bodies from his grave sites, prop them up on chairs, and have tea parties with them. When asked about his motives for the murders, Pedro reportedly said, "I lost my innocence at the age of 8, so I decided to do the same to as many girls as I could." Soon after his confession, he guided authorities to the remains of 53 victims. His confession swiftly resulted in the confirmation of a grand total of 110 victims in Ecuador. Later in 1980, Pedro was convicted of 110 murders and sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum prison sentence available in Ecuador at the time. In an interview shortly before his release, Pedro Lopez described himself as the man of the century. No one will ever forget me, and said he was being released 2 years earlier for good behavior. He was released on August 31st, 1994. After his release, Pedro was deported to Colombia and was detained as an illegal immigrant upon arrival. He was declared insane and committed to a mental hospital. 4 years later, he was released on $70 bail and on the condition that he checks in periodically with authorities. He chose to flee instead. In 2002, Colombian National Police and Interpol issued warrants for Pedro's arrest over murders similar to his MOs, but he has never been seen again and remains a fugitive. Fun little fact, up to 2005, the Guinness Book of World Records credited Pedro Lopez as being the most prolific serial killer in history. This listing has since been removed after complaints that it made a competition out of murder, and definitely didn't want no one to try to beat the record.